Welcome to the U.S. latest news channel. Watch the video to the end to find out the current and breaking news about the Russian war in Ukraine. In recent days, new developments have been emerging in the name of annexations, and it has also been seen that Vladimir Zelensky has taken different steps other than the NATO application. An official quite close to the state at this point said that a very clear answer to the annexations will be given by Vladimir Zelensky recently, and the president invited the defense and security chiefs to take fundamental decisions on Friday. At this point, it is also known that if Ukraine becomes a NATO member, the alliance will have to fight against Russia. For this reason, many officials believe that the issue was personally studied by Volodymyr Zelensky, and this possibility was also taken into consideration. However, very different opinions continue to be put forward between groups on social media. December. At this point, some people commenting on their social media accounts argue that Ukraine should definitely be admitted to NATO and that the regions belong to Ukraine, while others say that the NATO alliance with Russia should definitely not face off. In addition, many famous personalities continue to share their own thoughts about the Ukrainian-Russian tension and lead communities. In the war that started in early February and still has not reached a clear conclusion, Ukraine was extremely far behind against Russia. However, the endless support of European countries and the United States for what is happening to Ukraine continues both financially and in terms of armed force. At the previous stage of this process, it was announced that weapons technology and weapons assistance would be provided together with partner countries. According to this agreement, that have not yet been used and are currently being tested on some weapons laboratories have been given the opportunity in the market to combat the many improvements to both test and make observations about what weapons will be subjected in the future, which will be to the advantage of Ukraine. After the confirmation of this support, U.S. President Joe Biden also launched an aid campaign for Ukraine that will allow them to take one more step forward against Russia. The aid agreement, which also received approval from the U.S. government and was finally signed by Joe Biden, also received approval. The aid support, which both prevented the shutdown of the American government and included in the bill for billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, became approved together with the statement that came during the night hours. The agreement, which carries both economic and security scope, was signed. On Friday, September 30th, the White House announced that this agreement has been approved by all legal means, and aid packages will arrive on the Ukrainian side as soon as possible. It was reported that the agreements concluded were also approved by Ukraine, and they expressed eternal gratitude on the part of the United States for this assistance. As it is known, it was also known that the National Infantry rifles, which have not yet been demonstrated in a laboratory environment and has been tested on the battlefield to improve weapon technology, have also been donated to Ukraine before. Besides that, the loan agreement was also known. According to this agreement, the United States will again lend some military ammunition and the weapons to the Ukrainian side for the duration of the war, and immediately after this process, it became known that the U.S. government will be given of the various technological tools and weapons to be returned full. During the war, Ukraine and the United States were constantly gathering around the same table and coming together for various aid campaigns due to Russia's use of its power against the civilian population and creating an unfair competitive environment. The main reason for these agreements was actually that the United States wanted to reduce Russia's great power in a sense and become a more influential country on the world. But, of course, they wished that they did not have the forces to compare this power on the battlefield and fight with Russia. For this reason, they already knew the opportunity for Russia to declare war on Ukraine and were continuing to help Ukraine as much as they could. In this process, other world countries also felt the need to take a side in the war, whether they wanted to or not. At a later stage, the countries allied with the United States supported Ukraine with money and ammunition as a union. Of course, in this process, just like Turkey, neutral countries, the reconciliation of both sides and the exchange of prisoners as a union so that the war does not continue any longer, etc., they led things. However, when there was no step back from either side, this process dragged on and there was a weakening of the civilian population as well as the military forces of both sides. According to the agreement made by the United States at the end, the fee for the aid to be made was enough to blow the lips. Although it is said that this aid is more in the lobbies, it is known that a price higher than a fee of $12 billion was given for the purpose of supporting Ukraine. As for how this aid will be evaluated by Ukraine and what kind of course change it will lead to in the war, the developments will be included in the broad details that the world's media will present to us in the coming days. The US does not hide from the media in any way and is constantly working to make itself more powerless against Ukraine in the face of Russia. Finally, the aid made in this process was added to the aid made on economic and security grounds of $12 billion. A statement from the White House's official website took the place of the phrases, "The President's ongoing projects and studies in the federal government for fiscal year appropriations, regular appropriations until the date of December 16, 2022-2023 to be applicable federal appropriations law institutions," including the Appropriations Act was signed covering H.R. 6833 additional. It was reported that in Ukraine % in 2023. In addition, it was added that it was for the purpose of responding to the situation in Ukraine October. No details were given about what additional work the United States will do in the next stages and with which October it will continue its assistance to Ukraine. However, according to estimates and details provided on independent media channels, information was included that October additional funds will be opened for the health of the civilian population and the reconstruction of ruined war battlefields in the coming days. Although there is no information about the figures of additional allowances, it was said that this process will be completed by discussing with the authorities by Ukraine according to the developments in the country and the costs that will occur in October. Exact information will come in the coming days. In the war that began in February, Russia, which made good use of technology in terms of both weapons power, population, and area, was seen as completely advantageous against Ukraine. However, with the partner countries that have stepped in and the US's moves, Ukraine has suddenly shown that it has a force that can oppose Russia and even take a more advantageous position in the war. In this process, both the dedication of the Ukrainian president and the great resistance shown by the Ukrainian people caused astonishment in the world's media. Although it is seen as a war between Ukraine and Russia, it is actually known as a deconfliction where the US and Russia compare their forces behind the scenes and see who is stronger behind the table, even if not on the battlefield. Along with the signed financial support agreement, it was reported that in the absence of an approved state budget for the current fiscal year 2023, which will begin on October 1st, the United States intends to continue its financing in federal agencies. According to the content of the document, it was also known that training, equipment, weapons, and technologies for the purpose of support to the Ukrainian government were also involved in logistics and direct financial support in relation to Ukraine. Of course, not only the US country is taking part in all these supports. Partner countries working in the interests of the country and Ukraine are also continuing their material and arms support for Ukraine. In this process, it is aimed to reduce the power of the Russian side. Especially in European countries, extremely critical levels have been reached within the framework of the embargo rules applied against Russia. According to the partial mobilization agreement announced by Russia as part of the seriousness of the situation and signed by President Vladimir Putin, it was also known that volunteer soldiers were positioned on the borders of Ukraine. Of course, for Ukraine, where there are fewer people in terms of population, this situation has gained negative value. At this point, they are trying to equalize the situation with economic supports. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to be informed of the developments at the speed of light.